The Berlin Airlift breaking a blockade. The common story of the Berlin Airlift is that the Allies heroically flew food to a starving city. That is true, but it leaves out the more interesting part. The lesser-known fact is that Berlin had no right to be supplied by air. The wartime agreements guaranteed only rail, road, and canal access. When the Soviets blocked those ground routes on June 24, 1948, they were legally within the four power agreements. The air corridors were a loophole. The misconception is that the airlift was always a massive operation. On day one, the Allies had exactly 102 C-47s, each carrying barely 3 tons of cargo. Berlin needed 4,500 tons of supplies per day. Those 102 C-47s could deliver perhaps 300 tons. The math did not work. What made the math work was, honestly, a series of overlooked decisions about aircraft maintenance, pilot rotation, and, well, the single most boring but critical factor, weather minimums. The first decision was to switch aircraft. The C-54 Skymaster carried 10 tons per flight, more than triple the C-47's capacity. The United States rushed 300 of them to Germany. The second decision was to treat the airlift as a continuous conveyor belt, not just a series of individual missions. Aircraft took off every 3 minutes, around the clock. The Soviets controlled the airspace over their occupation zone, but they had agreed to 3 20-mile-wide air corridors from the west. They never closed them. The third decision was the most dangerous fly in weather that would ground any civilian airline. The airlift's official minimum visibility was 400 feet. Pilots often flew with less. One pilot described landing at Tempelhof in dense fog by counting the light poles on the approach. When he saw the third pole, he pulled back on the stick and hit the runway. The human side of the airlift produced an unexpected icon, a pilot named Gail Halvorson, who started dropping candy bars on tiny parachutes to Berlin's children. The candy bomber became a propaganda victory the Soviets could not counter. One American pilot with a bag of chocolate did more for Cold War morale than any policy paper. But the real cargo was coal. Berlin needed 3,500 tons of coal per day just to keep the lights on and homes heated. Coal is heavy, dirty, and shifts during flight. The coal dust got into everything: instruments, engines, the pilot's lungs. Maintenance crews worked 18-hour shifts just to keep the aircraft flying. The mechanics set a record that still stands. They stripped a C-54 to its airframe and rebuilt it in under 24 hours. The manufacturer said it could not be done. By spring 1949, the Soviets realized the airlift was working. They had expected the Allies to abandon Berlin within weeks. Instead, the Allies were landing 8,000 tons per day. On May 12, 1949, the Soviets lifted the blockade. They had lost the propaganda war. The airlift continued for another 5 months, just in case they changed their minds. The Berlin airlift cost 101 lives, mostly aircrew, killed in crashes caused by weather, fatigue, and the relentless pressure of the schedule. It also cost 75 aircraft and roughly $200 million in 1949 dollars, about $2.5 billion today. For that price, the Allies kept 2.5 million people alive for 11 months. The doctrinal lesson of the airlift is still taught in every military logistics school. When you cannot use the roads, use the sky, but only if you commit completely. The overlooked legacy is the system itself. The Berlin Airlift proved that a modern city could be supplied entirely by air, indefinitely, under combat conditions. History that goes deeper does not ask you to remember the tonnage numbers. It asks you to remember that the pilots flew in fog because the alternative was abandoning 2 million people. Subscribe to War Machiner and share this if you value history that goes deeper.